Harbor Light Diner sat quietly on a small corner in Brooklyn, where the old neon sign faded into the night fog. The wall clock showed 1:58 a.m., and the low hum of the coffee machine was the only sound keeping Emily Carter awake. She had worked the night shift here for nearly 6 years, ever since the accident that took her parents and her sister Sarah. But for Emily, Sarah's death had never really ended. Not when the police closed the case with the words, "victim killed during a robbery." Not when they returned her sister's torn handbag with a few belongings. And certainly not when the ring Sarah always wore, the one she never took off, vanished without a trace. She had tried to forget, but some memories cling harder the more you push them away, like shadows that refuse to step out of the dark. The door chime rang ting, a small sound that made Emily flinch. At this hour, customers were rare, usually just long-haul truckers or drunks looking for warmth. 4 men walked in. 3 wore dark suits, their eyes sharp and cold as blades. The 4th was different. Tall, broad-shouldered, a presence that froze the air for a beat. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, his shirt collar slightly open. His gaze deep, dark, unhurried. Emily felt it immediately. He didn't try to command attention. Power simply radiated from him, the kind that others could only imitate. "Welcome to Harbor Light," she said, forcing a steady tone. "Sit anywhere you'd like." The man chose the back corner, the one that faced both the front and rear doors, a habit of someone who had lived too long in danger. Emily carried over the menus. As she set them down, the light caught his hand, a gold ring set with a red stone. She froze. It looked exactly like the one Sarah used to wear. No, impossible. Her heart pounded. Memories flooded back Sarah that night, her mysterious smile, her last words. "You wouldn't understand, Em. There are things I have to do." 3 days later, she vanished. 2 weeks after that, her body was found by the Hudson River. No ring, no explanation. "Are you all right?" His low voice pulled her back. His eyes a deep brown shadowed like the night itself. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "Just thought I saw something familiar." She poured their coffee, but her hands trembled at a few of the drops spilling over the rim. He said nothing, only tilted his head slightly, studying her as if reading her thoughts. Her pulse still raced as she turned away. That ring. It had an engraving, a lion within a Latin circle, exactly as Sarah once described. She whispered, barely audible, "My sister used to have a ring just like that." The air went still. The man's hand paused midair. The 3 others looked up, cold, alert, wary. He fixed his eyes on her. "What did you just say?" Emily swallowed hard. I just meant my sister had one like it. 5 years ago." Silence. Heavy, like the calm before a storm. Then he set down his cup, his voice quiet but firm. "What's your name, Emily Carter? And your sister's Sarah Carter?" He closed his eyes for one brief second, but when he opened them again, something had changed. As if the name had pulled a ghost from his past. "Sit down." His voice wasn't loud, but it allowed no refusal. "I'm working." "Just a minute, Emily." She sat. Her hand gripped the coffee pot like a weapon. The man slipped the ring from his finger and placed it on the table. The overhead light struck the red stone, glowing like dark blood. "This ring has been in my family for over 3 centuries, he said slowly. "It was stolen 6 years ago during an attack that killed 6 of my men." Emily's breath caught. A year later, he continued. "Someone returned it. No note, no message. I never knew who brought it back until tonight." Her mind spun. "You're saying my sister had it and returned it?" His eyes locked on hers. The question is, why? Outside, the wind howled through the empty street, carrying the scent of cold rain. Emily's world tilted. Everything blurred like a scene after a shockwave. "I don't know." She just said she had something important to do, and then she was gone. He leaned back silent for a long time, then finally spoke softly, almost gently. "Think I know who killed your sister?" The air froze. The words fell like a small stone, creating a tidal wave inside her. Emily wanted to ask to scream, but no sound came out. The man laid $200 bills on the table and stood. "Thanks for the coffee. And don't tell anyone about this, if you want to live to see morning." The door closed behind them. The bell chimed once more, then silence. She sat there staring at the plain white business card on the table. Henry Sullivan. Just a name and a phone number. No address. No title. The dim light reflected off the scratched metal counter. Outside, a black SUV slipped away into the rain. She could hear her heartbeat strong, uneven, like she'd just touched a live wire of a deadly secret. And in that instant, Emily knew. This wasn't just another night shift. It was the first door opening toward a path she might never return from. When closing up, she picked up the card. The paper was thick, expensive, with a faint scent of smoke. Beneath the number was a faded ink mark, the lion crest identical to the one on the ring. Emily smiled faintly, a mix of fear and resolve. If Henry was telling the truth, then Sarah wasn't just a victim. She'd been the keeper of something far bigger. And if Emily wanted the truth, or to find herself again, she would have to call that number. Just one call. But it could change everything. If you believe that the past never truly sleeps, join me in part 2, where a phone call at 9 a.m. opens the door to truth, and a love that walks the line between light and shadow. The next morning, New York felt damp and cold, as if the city itself was still holding onto the echo of last night's rain. Droplets clung to the window pane of Emily's small apartment, scattering silvery light across the cracked ceiling. Emily sat on a wooden chair by the window, clutching the white business card so tightly its edges had begun to curl. Henry Sullivan. Just 2 words, but they carried a strange, heavy weight. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of that ring reappeared, the red stone glowing like frozen blood in the dark. And his voice low, calm, but hiding something beneath the surface. Not exactly a threat, but not safety either. "I think I know who killed your sister." Those words kept replaying in her mind, rhythmic and relentless, like waves crashing against a cliff. 8:59 a.m. The old clock on the wall ticked with urgent precision. Emily held her phone, her fingers trembling. She knew this was a mistake. No sane person would call a man who appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the night with 3 bodyguards and spoke of death like it was an everyday matter. But Sarah, if her sister had truly been involved in something, if her death hadn't been the accident the police claimed Emily had to know. She pressed call. The phone rang once. Emily Carter. His voice came through steady, as if he'd been waiting by the phone all night. "You knew I'd call. I didn't guess. I was certain. There's a car waiting outside your building, gray sedan. The driver's name is Michael. Go with him. We need to talk privately." Emily stepped to the window, and there it was. A gray sedan idled at the curb engine, humming softly. A man in a dark suit looked up at her window and nodded once. A chill slid down her spine. "You're watching me, no. I'm protecting you. There are people who don't want you remembering the past, Emily." Silence lingered for a beat. "You have 10 minutes. Bring nothing but your phone." The call ended. The car glided through the city like a dream. Glass towers reflected the pale morning sun, commuters rushed by, and no one noticed the small woman sitting behind tinted windows, her heartbeat racing as if she were crossing into another world. Michael, the driver, said nothing. Occasionally, he glanced in the rearview mirror, his calm eyes those of someone accustomed to danger. After 20 minutes, the car turned into an old Manhattan district, where red brick warehouses had been converted into sleek offices. Michael stopped in front of a nondescript building, no nameplate, only a steel door and an electronic keypad. He swiped a card. The door unlocked with a soft click. "Mr. Sullivan is expecting you," he said quietly, with something close to respect in his tone. Inside was a different world, bright, clean, and still smelling faintly of wood and leather. A private elevator carried her to the 7th floor. When the doors opened, Henry was already there. Gone was the black suit from last night. Today, he wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, the top buttons undone. A faint tattoo on his wrist. Latin words she couldn't read peeked from under the cuff. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low but less distant. Emily hesitated. "I'm not sure I had a choice." Henry smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You did, but you still came. That says more than you realize." He gestured for her to follow. The inner room looked like a cross between an office and an investigation board's metal filing cabinets. Lined the walls, maps covered in red strings connected dozens of photos and names. Henry stopped in front of a photograph, a burnt-out warehouse with a barely legible sign, Pier 42, Hudson Docks. "This is where the ring was stolen," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the picture. 6 years ago, my people were transporting legal goods, Italian fabric. That night we were ambushed. 6 men died. The shipment vanished. So did the ring." He turned to her. "A year later, it reappeared on my desk. No note, no message. But from the records, I found one name, Sarah Carter." Emily's fists tightened. "My sister didn't do anything wrong. She was the kindest person I've ever known." "Maybe. But kind people can still stumble into hell." Henry handed her a file. Inside were printed emails, translation contracts, and bank receipts, all under Sarah Carter's name. She worked as a translator for Benson Freight, a front for an arms smuggling network. 3 days before she disappeared, she resigned and sent an email. "I don't want to be part of this." Emily's voice shook. "You think she was killed because of that?" Henry didn't answer right away. He poured a glass of water and set it in front of her. "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." Their eyes locked, the air between them thick, unspoken. "She found the ring in the burned warehouse. She planned to hand it over to the police. But someone, maybe my enemies, maybe someone from my own organization intercepted her. I once believed they killed her to hurt me." His voice lowered, roughened by memory. "But last night when you said my sister had a ring like that, I understood. Sarah wasn't the thief. She was the one who gave it back." Silence fell between them, dense, electric. A shaft of light cut across the room, catching one side of Henry's face, the darkness in him sharper than the glow. Emily whispered, "So what will you do now? Find the one who killed her? And if he belongs to your world?" Henry tilted his head slightly, eyes turning to steel. "Then I'll end that world myself." The words sent a shiver through her, not out of fear but conviction. He meant it. As she rose to leave, he called softly, "Emily." She turned. Henry took out a small metal token and placed it in her hand. "Keep this with you at all times. There's a tracker inside. If you're ever in danger, press it twice." "I'll know." She looked down. It was shaped like a lion, the same emblem engraved on the ring. "You think I'm in danger?" He stepped closer. The distance between them shrank to a single breath. "You're not just a reminder of my past anymore, Emily. You've become part of it. And some people never forgive the past." His gaze lingered, part warning, part promise. And in it, she saw something else, a loneliness so deep it almost frightened her. "Have you ever thought about walking away from it all?" she asked softly. He smiled, barely more than an exhale. "The day I met you, I started to." Emily said nothing more. She stepped into the elevator. As the steel doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of Henry, his reflection. Distant, haunted, as if looking through her toward a ghost named Sarah, who still hadn't found peace. Downstairs, Michael was already holding the car door open. On the ride back to Brooklyn, Emily touched the pocket where the small, lion-shaped token rested. It was cold, but in her chest, a fragile spark had begun to burn. Fear and something dangerously close to hope. A quiet instinct told her that what had begun between them was no longer just a search for justice. It was something far more dangerous and impossible to stop. Afternoons in Manhattan had a distinct kind of light, golden, cold, and dry, as if filtered through the glass walls of its endless skyscrapers. Emily walked beside Henry down a long, carpeted hallway. Each step echoed sharply, as though they were moving through the quiet heartbeat of the world. She wasn't sure why she had agreed to return here to the nameless building, the 7th floor, the man whose eyes always seemed to carry darkness. But something in him made it impossible to refuse. Maybe it was because when he spoke about Sarah, his voice had sounded more real than all the polite condolences she'd ever received. "You okay?" Henry asked, calm, but not casual. Emily nodded slightly, clutching the strap of her bag. Just feels strange. I never imagined my sister would be involved with someone like you." He chuckled softly, a low, rough sound that couldn't quite hide the fatigue underneath. "Trust me, I never imagined I'd be involved with someone like you either." That simple line made Emily's heart stumble. The room that opened before them felt like another worldwide dim and filled with the scent of old paper and rust. Rows of metal filing cabinets stretched like a maze, and in the center stood a long table littered with maps, photographs, and case files. Henry gestured for her to sit, then switched on the large wall screen. A flood of images appeared, faces, numbers, redacted contracts. "This is the part you don't know," he said, brushing his fingers over the control pad. Sarah wasn't just translating documents. She leaked several classified files to a journalist. They vanished from every database the day she died. Emily shivered. Who deleted them? Half his face was in light, half in shadow as he replied, "Someone powerful, and terrified of the truth coming out." He opened another thinner file. "I had my people trace your sister's accounts. There was a $5,000 transfer from Belmare Logistics, the company laundering money for one of my rivals." Emily looked up, her voice trembling. "You think my sister was bribed?" Henry shook his head, his expression softening. "No, I think she was trying to save someone. Maybe someone in my organization, maybe me." Silence lingered. Emily's gaze fell on the large city map spread across the table. Red threads connected pins marking Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Hudson Docks, and one last crimson dot far out on Long Island. "What's that, a house your sister visited before she disappeared?" "I found it only last week." "Have you told the police?" Henry gave a short, bitter laugh. "The NYPD doesn't investigate what they're paid not to see." Emily looked at him and realized that smile carried more sorrow than arrogance, the weary acceptance of a man who knew exactly how the world worked. "How long have you lived like this?" she asked quietly, gesturing around the room. "This world built on secrets and danger." Henry didn't answer right away. He poured her a glass of water, then spoke slowly. "I was born into it. My father built this network. When he died, I inherited everything, including his enemies." She lifted her eyes. His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. And now he added softly, "I'm starting to think I inherited his guilt too." A faint breeze slipped through the half-open window, scattering golden dust between them. "If you feel guilty," Emily said quietly, "why not stop?" Henry stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "Because men like me don't get to stop. We only have two options: disappear, or be remembered as the last ones who dared to stand against everything." She looked into his eyes, that strange mix of cruelty and compassion. And in that moment, she saw a fracture in the armor he wore around himself. Something in her chest tightened not in fear, but in empathy. The afternoon dragged on. Henry walked her through the rows of files explaining names, alliances, betrayals. His tone was steady, almost detached, like a man narrating a tragedy he no longer wished to claim. "Sarah came here once," he said, stopping in front of an old metal cabinet. "She sat right there. She asked me, 'Do you ever think about the people you've made disappear?'" Emily stayed silent. "What did you tell her?" Henry smiled faintly, a hollow, wandering smile. "I said every night." He turned away, pulling a photo from a drawer. Sarah wearing a thick coat standing outside an old diner. She was smiling, gentle, warm, alive. "She believed there were still good people in my world," Henry said quietly. "Maybe that's why she died." Emily's voice quivered. "You say that like you loved her." He didn't answer. He just stared at the photo long enough for the wind outside to die into silence. By the time they left the room, the sky had dimmed into the red gold of sunset. "Thank you for trusting me," Henry said as he walked her to the door. "But from now on, be careful. Someone knows you were here." Emily froze. "You mean they're watching me? Why do you think I gave you the tracker?" He tilted his head slightly, his tone softening. "If anything happens, remember this trust. No one, not even me." The last line struck her like a chill through bone. The door closed behind her. Inside, Henry stood still, hand tightening around the ring in his pocket. The red stone caught the fading light, a glint of blood, a remnant of the past that refused to die. Outside, Emily moved quickly through the crowd, her thoughts heavy as the city hummed around her. She didn't know what she had stepped into, only that every step pulled her deeper into a story Sarah hadn't finished telling. Above the skyline, clouds gathered thick gray full of rain, the kind of rain that had fallen 6 years ago, the night Sarah disappeared. And for the first time, Emily wondered. In Henry Sullivan's world, was anyone ever truly innocent the night it rained again in Brooklyn? Raindrops as fine as silver dust slid down the window pane, tracing lines like fading memories. Emily sat on her bed laptop open before her. The file Henry had sent glowed coldly on the screen. Lines of data filled the page, company names, account codes, transaction dates. Things no ordinary person should ever see. She didn't know what she was looking for. Only that the more she read, the colder she felt. Not from the rain, but from fear. The fear that Sarah hadn't stumbled into this world by accident, that she had chosen to enter it for reasons Emily couldn't yet understand. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared. Why are you digging into this? If you want to live, stop now. No number, no name. Emily's pulse spiked. She glanced around the room window, closed lights off, only the blue glow of the screen. Yet something in the stillness felt wrong, as if someone was watching her. Then, click. The hallway light outside flickered out. Her breath caught. A beat later, bang! The front door was forced open. Emily backed against the wall, heart pounding so hard she thought it would break her ribs. But when the door swung open, it wasn't a stranger. It was Henry. He wore a long coat drenched from the rain, eyes sharp and cold as steel. Did you get the message? Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. How did you know? He raised his phone, the same message glowed on his screen. They sent it to me too. That means they know where you are. Who are they? Henry didn't answer. He moved through the room, scanning every corner. Then he stopped at the window and lifted the curtain slightly. Across the street sat a black car. Its headlights were off, but exhaust rose faintly into the rain. His voice dropped to a near whisper. It's time. Come with me. Everything after that happened in a blur. Henry's car sliced through the rain-slick street's headlights, smearing across the windshield. Emily sat in the passenger seat wrapped in his coat. It smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. Where are you taking me? Somewhere safe. Safe. Nothing feels safe when I'm sitting next to a man who could kill anyone if he wanted to. Henry let out a low chuckle without turning. If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't have bothered saving you. She fell silent. His tone was calm, but beneath it there was something painfully honest. A quiet conviction that sounded like the only truth he still believed in. They left the city behind, heading toward Long Island. When the car finally stopped, Emily realized they were at a secluded cottage nestled among pine trees. A soft golden light glowed from the porch, gentle, steady like the breath that follows a nightmare. Whose house is this? Someone who once saved my life, Henry said, stepping out. Now I keep it standing in return. Inside the house was surprisingly warm. Oak floors, the scent of dried cinnamon, a small fire crackling in the hearth. Paintings of Italian landscapes lined the walls. Churches, seas, vineyards, scenes of peace that didn't belong to the man standing beside her. Emily sat on the couch, still clutching her bag. How long do you plan to keep me here? Until I find out who sent that message? And if you never do, Henry looked up, eyes steady. Then I'll make sure they never get close to you again, ever. They ate dinner in silence. Rain tapped rhythmically against the roof, the firelight softening the sharpness in Henry's face. For the first time, he didn't look like a mafia boss. He looked like a man trying to hold a storm at bay. Do you always try to control everything? Emily asked lightly, trying to ease the air. No, I just try to control what I'm afraid of losing. And what's that? His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Someone who knows too much about me and still chooses to stay. Her throat tightened. She wanted to respond with sarcasm, but her chest ached instead. Maybe because for the first time in his eyes, she didn't see power, she saw fear. Later, they sat across from each other by the fire. Henry poured wine movements, deliberate practiced. "Have you ever thought about forgiveness?" he asked, voice low like music from a faraway room. "Forgiving who? The world." "Me?" Emily looked up. The firelight danced in his pupils, tinting them amber. "I don't know," she said softly. "Every time I forgive, I lose another piece of myself." Henry smiled faintly. "Then don't forgive. Let me do it for you. You can't. Not until I know what it is that hurt you." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She stepped outside onto the porch. The rain had thickened white and endless. The wind sighed through the pines. A moment later, footsteps approached behind her. Henry came out wearing a thin jacket, standing silently beside her. After a long pause, he spoke, voice barely above the rain. "I once had a sister. She died in an explosion I caused." Emily turned, startled. He stared into the gray distance, his tone slow heavy. "Since then, I've taught myself not to love anyone, because everyone I've ever loved ends up dead." Emily's fingers tightened on the wet railing. "Maybe that's why you're afraid of me," she whispered. Henry looked at her. "Afraid?" "Because I remind you that you still can love." The words cut like a thin blade, no blood but deep pain. He didn't respond. He just stepped closer. The wind blew her hair, brushing his cheek. She moved slightly, but he didn't. In the rain-blurred light, his voice was almost a confession. "If I told you that no one has ever scared me the way losing you does, would you believe me?" Emily's heart stilled. She didn't answer. She simply stood there, letting the rain, the wind, and the quiet terror between them blend into one trembling silence. Far in the woods, a red light blinked once, then vanished. Henry's eyes flickered. He moved instantly, pulling the curtains shut, motioning for her to turn off the lights. "What's happening?" Emily whispered. His voice dropped sharp as steel. "No one knows the coordinates of this place. If there's a red light, it means they've found us." She could hear his heartbeat, fast, strong, real. He pulled her close, pressing her against the wall, shielding her with his body. "Stay quiet," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm in the frozen air. Outside, the sound of engines rumbled faintly through the trees. It lasted only a few seconds, but long enough for Emily to understand one thing. The real storm had just begun. Dawn over Long Island was pale and misted like a mirror covered in breath. Weak light filtered through the window, casting soft streaks across the sand-colored curtain. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, hair tousled dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't truly slept. Henry hadn't returned from checking the forest perimeter. The wind and distant birds made the small house feel even emptier. She glanced around. The fireplace was cold, the empty wine glasses from last night still on the table. Everything was exactly where it had been, except the warmth he'd left behind. On the chair, his black coat lay folded carelessly. Inside the pocket, she found a small USB drive. No label, no note. Only one faint engraving on the metal surface, SC. Her breath caught. Sarah Carter. Her hands trembled, afraid that whatever she was about to uncover could change everything. When Henry finally returned, a light drizzle had begun. He removed his gloves, hung up his coat, and said nothing. His face was darker than usual. Something in his eyes told her he'd seen something more terrifying than danger, the truth. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." "Nightmares." "No. Memories." Henry paused, looking at her quietly. "I know that feeling." "Which one?" "The one where you wake up and realize the person you love only exists in your memories." The words were soft, but cut deep. Emily turned away. She was afraid that if she met his gaze any longer, she'd fall into it, that hidden grief that made people want to stay if only to understand it. By noon, when Henry stepped out to call Michael, Emily opened her laptop. She inserted the USB. The screen flickered, rows of encrypted files appeared. Only one folder was unlocked. It was titled, "For E." She clicked it. A video began to play. Sarah sat in a bright room, a whiteboard behind her filled with names crossed out in red. She looked thinner, exhausted, but her voice was steady. "Emily, if you're watching this, It means I'm gone. You'll hate me for keeping secrets. But there are things that can't be said without putting you in danger. The ring, it's evidence. Inside the stone is a chip containing data on Sullivan's trafficking and arms network. I promised to give it to someone I trusted, but I never got the chance. If anyone comes to you, don't trust them, even if they say they love you. The screen went black. Emily sat frozen. Tears came sharp and unstoppable. Her sister, gentle, careful Sarah, had been entangled in something monstrous. And worse, Emily no longer knew who she could trust. Henry Sullivan, the man making coffee in the next room, was he the one Sarah meant to trust? Or the one she warned her about? The door opened. Henry stepped in damp from the rain. He stopped when he saw her pale face and tear-streaked cheeks. What happened? Emily stood, voice trembling but sharp. The USB in your coat. How long were you going to hide it from me? Henry froze, eyes flashing. You watched it? Yes. And now I know everything. Sarah wasn't just translating documents, she held evidence against your organization. She was going to deliver it to someone. Was that someone you... Or the FBI? Emily? Don't say my name like you care, she snapped, her voice breaking. My sister died because of you. And you stand there calm like it means nothing. Henry was silent for a long moment, then stepped closer. His eyes were no longer cold, only empty in the way of someone who'd lost too much. You're right, Sarah died because of me, but not because I killed her. She died because she believed I could change. Emily stared at him, speechless. Henry's voice dropped rough, like a confession dragged from his soul. She came to me with that chip, said she'd give it to me if I stopped the deals, the blood, the lies. I agreed. But that night she vanished. When I found her, it was too late. Do you have proof? Henry reached into his pocket and took out a photo. Sarah standing in front of a warehouse at Hudson Docks, holding the ring, smiling faintly. She sent me this 10 minutes before she was killed. Emily sank into the chair, sobbing silently. Henry stepped closer, but didn't touch her. He simply stood behind her, close enough for their breaths to mix. Sarah believed there was good in you, she whispered. I'm not sure I do. Then why are you still here? Because I need to know if her faith was worth dying for. Henry's lips curved in a tired, bitter smile. You're just like her, not afraid of pain, only afraid of wasting it. He poured her a glass of water and sat across from her. You don't have to trust me, but trust the truth. The ring, it's still out there, and it's the only thing that can bring the real killer into the light. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered through the pines, glinting off raindrops like shards of glass. Emily watched Henry pack a small bag, his movements precise, calm, the rhythm of a man who'd lived too long on the edge of death. Where are you going, Hudson? The last place Sarah was seen. Aren't you afraid it's a trap? He smiled faintly. I was born in traps, Emily. Now I just want to walk into one on my own terms. She hesitated, then said quietly, If you go, I'm coming with you. He turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. You don't have to. My sister died for courage. I won't live the rest of my life in fear. Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then his expression softened. A small, tired smile, part acceptance, part surrender. All right, but if anything happens, promise me one thing, run, don't look back. I'm done leaving people behind. Their eyes met. No words, no promises. Only a heavy, fragile silence, the kind that exists when two broken people decide to stop running. When night fell, they left the cottage. The car rolled down the empty road waves, murmuring softly in the distance. In the passenger seat, Emily clutched the USB tightly. Henry glanced over, his voice low. Don't open it again. Some truths once seen can't be undone. She met his eyes, whispering, maybe I never wanted to undo them. Outside, the city lights of New York blurred in the distance, streaks of gold across a dark horizon. Inside the car, warmth flickered between them, fragile, dangerous, and real enough to make a closed heart remember how to beat. And somewhere in that darkness ahead, Sarah seemed to be smiling. The Hudson night was thick with the scent of rust and cold vapor. The abandoned docks loomed in silence, stacked containers like hulking tombs. Streetlights cast a faint yellow glow on the dark water, reflecting the ripples that broke against the hulls of forgotten ships. Henry's car stopped at the edge of the pier, its engine still warm. Emily opened the door and stepped out. The wind from the river hit her face sharp with salt and diesel. She pulled her coat tight, scanning the empty yard. It felt both familiar and foreign. "Sarah came here," Henry said, his deep voice half swallowed by the wind. This was where she was supposed to meet the person taking the ring. "I was 13 minutes late." He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. 13 minutes. Emily froze. 13 minutes, simple words, but a chasm between life and death. They entered the derelict warehouse. The rusted metal doors creaked, and the air inside was thick with mold and the faint, acrid scent of smoke, remnants of the explosion that had made headlines years ago. Henry switched on his flashlight. The beam sliced through the darkness, glinting off cracked brick and broken glass. In one corner, a faded message scrawled in white paint, SC. 2 letters, simple, fragile, and they hit Emily like a punch to the chest. "She was really here," she whispered. Henry nodded. He knelt down, running his fingers along the concrete floor where fragments of scorched metal still lay. "I had the site excavated. No body was found except my 6 men. The police said the explosion was too strong. It could have erased everything." He looked up, eyes sharp as a blade. "But I never believed Sarah died here." Emily's voice trembled. "You think she's still alive?" Henry was silent. His gaze drifted toward the open frame of the rusted door, where a distant spotlight cut through the fog. "It's not what I think," he said softly. "It's what I feel." Before she could reply, footsteps echoed, heavy, measured, closing in. Henry's reflexes were instant. He pulled her into the shadows. 3 men entered the warehouse, not in uniform, but Emily saw it in their stance, their eyes mercenaries. "So she's with you, huh? Sullivan?" one sneered. "Heard you've gone soft. Hand the girl over, and maybe we let you live." Henry stepped into the dim light, half his face illuminated. Calm, cold, deadly. "You should know," he said quietly, "when I go soft. That's when I'm most dangerous." The first shot cracked before his sentence ended. Gunfire erupted, deafening. Emily screamed and ducked as Henry dragged her down. Bullets tore through the walls, spraying dust and shards of metal into the air. Henry drew a second gun from his belt and fired 3 times. 1 man dropped instantly. The other 2 scrambled behind the containers. "Stay here," he ordered, voice clipped steel hard. "If anything happens, run to the front door. And you, I don't run." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow. The shootout lasted barely 2 minutes, but for Emily, time fractured. Gunfire echoing steel and the sound of rain hitting the tin roof merged into a single storm of chaos. Then silence. When she lifted her head, Henry was standing again, his shirt torn, dust and blood staining the fabric. A shallow wound grazed his shoulder, but he was steady, gun still lowered. "You're hurt," she cried, rushing to him, hands trembling as she searched for the wound. "It's nothing," he murmured, trying to smile through a sharp breath. "I'm used to it." "Don't say that," she snapped, eyes burning. "You're not made of steel. You're human." For once, Henry didn't argue. He let her press a strip of cloth against the wound, her touch soft but certain. His eyes softened, quiet as the sea after a storm. "Emily," he said hoarsely, "if I hadn't let Sarah go alone that night, she might still be alive." "You can't change the past." "No," he said, "but I can stop it from repeating." He met her gaze, the flashlight trembling between them, throwing fractured light across their faces. "I won't let them touch you. Not while I'm still breathing." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Henry grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back exit. They ran through rows of containers across open ground, slick with rain. By the time they reached the car, the downpour had turned torrential. The vehicle blended into the darkness, nearly invisible. When the doors shut, Emily could hear nothing but her heartbeat and the sound of rain. Henry started the engine. His hands were steady, but blood seeped through his sleeve. "You need a hospital." "No, the cops will trace us. Trust me, they're not on our side." "Then where are we going?" "To the only place we still have an ally." "Who?" Henry's jaw tightened. The man who once betrayed me. They drove into southern Manhattan, where neon lights flickered through the drizzle. A narrow alley led to a small building, its metal shutter half closed, faint music humming from inside. Henry knocked 3 times sharp, deliberate. After a pause, the door cracked open. A man with gray hair and wary eyes stared out. Jesus. Henry Sullivan. Good to see you too, Arthur. The man scoffed. I thought you were dead. Henry smirked faintly. I still owe the world a promise. Arthur's gaze flicked past him to Emily. Who's she? Sarah's replacement. The air froze. Emily clenched her fists, but Henry's voice was low, firm. No one replaces her. Arthur sighed and stepped aside. Fine, come in, but this place isn't safe anymore. Inside was a bunker of screens, wires, and surveillance equipment. On the main monitor, security feeds flickered non-stop. Arthur opened a file pointing at a digital map. They're not just after you anymore, Henry. Another group's joined in, more organized, more precise. My guess, Belmare Logistics. Henry's eyes darkened. They want the chip. Not just the chip. They want to erase everyone who's ever known about it, including your girl. Emily stared at the screens, overwhelmed. The whole city seemed alive, pulsing with danger, and she, an ordinary woman, was suddenly its epicenter. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Dragging me into this? Henry turned to her. The neon light outside painted his face in shades of rain and shadow. Yes, he said softly, but too late. Because now I can't imagine this without you. Emily didn't respond. She just looked at him, really looked, and beneath the guilt, the power, the darkness, she saw it, a faint spark of humanity trembling but still alive. Thunder rolled outside. On the surveillance screen, a red dot blinked the Hudson docks. Someone's gone back there, Arthur murmured. And they brought fire. Henry's expression hardened. They're wiping everything. He turned to Emily, voice steady but final. This fight isn't mine alone anymore. From here on, you have to choose trust me or walk away. Emily met his eyes, then stepped forward, placing her hand on his wounded shoulder. You forget, she whispered. My sister said the same thing, and she chose to trust. Henry closed his eyes. For a brief second, the rain outside stopped. All that remained was the sound of 2 hearts heavy alive beating in unison. The darkness outside was still vast. But within it, 2 people, a fallen Mafia boss and a woman haunted by loss, kept walking forward knowing the storm was far from over. That morning, the city was wrapped in a fog so thick it seemed to blur everything together. The skyscrapers, the billboards, and even New York's restless rhythm. Emily sat quietly by the basement window of the hidden safe house where Henry and Arthur had been working all night. Maps encrypted data and faces flickered across the screens, fragments of a puzzle. Only they seemed to understand. Henry hadn't told her the full plan, only murmured, "It's time for the past to face itself." She didn't ask more, because when he said it, his eyes calm, steady, carried something she couldn't quite name. Something that felt like a goodbye. Arthur stood by the control table, his voice rough from cigarettes. Belmare's men are on the move. I picked up a satellite signal coming from the western outskirts. Looks like they're holding something or someone you want. Henry's gaze sharpened. The ring, or the person carrying it. The air in the room changed instantly. Emily's heart clenched. You mean someone's still alive? Arthur nodded slowly. I can't confirm, but the biosignal matches the medical record of Sarah Carter. The world around Emily stopped. Her sister's name so familiar, yet buried for years, coated in her ears. No, that's impossible, she whispered. No body was ever found. Henry cut in his eyes like blades. And I told you I never believed she died at Hudson. Arthur sighed. If you want to be sure, you'll have to go there. But listen, Henry Belmare isn't small time anymore. They've got soldiers' money and the government behind them. You can't rely on instinct this time. Henry looked straight at him. No, Arthur. I'll rely on the one person I trust. His gaze found Emily. She didn't speak, only nodded. By afternoon, they left the city in an old pickup truck with fake plates. The sky hung low and gray, the air heavy with iron and rain-soaked earth. For miles, the only sounds were the hum of the engine, and the silence stretched thin between them. Have you thought about what it means? If Sarah's really alive? Emily finally asked, voice small. Henry didn't look away from the road. It means someone lied. And I'm going to make them tell the truth properly. And what about me? He turned to her briefly, his dark eyes softening. You just have to be here. When the truth comes out, you'll be the only one with the right to forgive. She pressed her lips together. You always talk like you don't need forgiveness. He gave a faint, bitter smile. That's because I don't think I deserve it. By sunset, they reached West Haven, a former industrial district now overgrown and silent. Derelict factories stood half-eaten by vines. The wind whistled through hollow windows. Arthur had sent the coordinates before cutting contact, an old warehouse on the edge of a hill, far from any homes. Henry killed the engine and loaded his gun. Stay here. No. Emily shook her head. I came to end this, not to wait. He stared at her, ready to argue, but her eyes were harder than he'd ever seen. Finally, he sighed. Stay close. Don't stray. She nodded. Inside the warehouse was dark and cold dust, thick on the floor. They moved silently, each step echoing faintly. Then a metallic clatter. Henry raised his hand for her to stop. The beam of the flashlight swept across the shadows. And then she saw her, a woman sitting against the wall. Frail, pale eyes sunken but unmistakably familiar. Sarah! Emily gasped, her voice breaking. The woman lifted her head. Surprise flickered, then a trembling smile. You came. Emily dropped to her knees, pulling her sister into her arms, tears mixing with dust. You're alive! My God, you're really alive! Sarah's body trembled. Not for long. Henry stepped closer, scanning the room. IV tubes, wires, a biometric tracker on her wrist. They drugged her, he muttered. She's been held as leverage. Sarah gave a weak laugh. Not leverage, a trade, for what he's holding. Henry froze. The ring. She nodded faintly. They know you have it. They want you to come back. Tires screeched outside. Headlights swept through the cracks in the walls. They're here, Henry said quietly. He pulled at Emily behind him, gun raised. Take Sarah through the back. I'll hold them off. No, Emily cried. You can't. He placed a hand against her cheek, his touch soft, his voice low and breaking. You pulled me out of the dark, Emily. Let me repay that debt my way. Before she could reply, he was gone, swallowed by the dim light, the mist, and the smell of gasoline. The first gunshots shattered the night. Emily dragged Sarah toward the back exit, heart-racing, lungs burning. But before they could leave, Sarah stopped gripping her hand. You need to know this, she said, her voice fractured. The ring, it doesn't just hold data. It's proof that Henry worked with the CIA. Emily froze. What? He wasn't just a criminal. He was one of them, a pawn. And when he refused to keep playing, they made him the villain. Outside the firefight raged bullets, thunder, rain. Emily's thoughts spiraled to run, or to turn back, to believe, or to doubt. Sarah squeezed her hand. He can save you, but he can also destroy you. Don't let your heart blind you. When Emily burst from the warehouse, the scene before her unfolded like a slow-motion film. Henry stood alone in the open yard, facing 3 armed men. Rain poured down, light flickering across his bloodied face, and still his eyes burned steady. He fired once, clean, precise. 1 man dropped. The others faltered, retreating, but a bullet grazed his shoulder, crimson blooming through the rain. Henry. Emily screamed, running toward him. He turned, managed a faint, weary smile. I told you not to. Before he could finish, an explosion roared behind them. The warehouse erupted in flames, the fire swallowing the sky. Emily hit the ground, ears ringing, smoke blinding her. When she opened her eyes, she saw Henry through the haze, pulling her up, carrying her away from the blaze. His eyes glowed in the firelight, not with cruelty, but with something achingly human. And in that fleeting moment, she understood. Sarah had been right about his past, but wrong about his present. Because the man holding her in his arms, running through the inferno, no longer belonged to the darkness. Rain had fallen for 3 days straight after the explosion in West Haven. The city looked as if it had been covered by a morning veil of smoke and water. The news spoke vaguely, a mysterious fire. No confirmed victims, no names were mentioned. No truth was told that one person was gone, one had vanished, and one was left living between two worlds, reality and lies. Emily sat by the window of a shabby motel room, watching raindrops trace long paths down the glass, like threads of fate. A small bandage still marked her wrist, a reminder of the night Henry had dragged her out of the fire. She remembered everything: the smell of smoke, the sound of his heartbeat, and that final look, a mix of love and guilt. Since that night, Henry had disappeared. No messages, no trace. Only one question echoed in her mind: did he leave to protect her? Or because he was afraid she'd learn the truth? On the fourth morning, someone knocked on the door. A brown envelope slid under the frame. Inside was an old printed photo. Sarah, but not the Sarah she remembered. This photo was recent gaunt face eyes, still bright, and behind her the blurred wall of what looked like a cell. Below it, a handwritten message: "If you want to see your sister, come to Queensboro Bridge at midnight." Emily gripped the photo, tightly torn between hope and dread. Who sent it, Henry? Or the people using Sarah to bait her? She stood up, resolve hardening in her chest. Whoever it was, she would go. Because sometimes facing fear was the only way to find the truth. That night, New York seemed to swallow itself whole. Rain poured relentlessly. The wind tore at her coat as Emily stepped onto the Queensboro Bridge. Streetlights blurred into yellow streaks on the wet pavement, and through the hiss of rain came the sound of footsteps. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not Sarah. Henry. He stood there, dark coat soaked through hair plastered to his forehead, and yet his eyes, still the same eyes that once made it impossible for her to walk away. "You." She froze, not knowing where to begin. At last she whispered, voice trembling. "You lied to me. You worked for the CIA. You hid everything." Henry didn't deny it. "Yes, I was one of them. Until I realized their version of justice was never meant for people like me. And my sister. Was she just another casualty in their game?" He was silent for a long moment. Then softly, "Sarah isn't dead. They took her to force me back. I tried to get her out, but the plan failed. I was late like always, so this photo is real." Henry nodded. "She's alive, but if you're here, it means they've already started the final game." The final game? He stepped closer, rain cascading down his face. His eyes were full of sorrow, so deep it seemed to quiet even the storm. "Emily, you're the bait. They know if they touch Sarah, I'll come." Before she could respond, the growl of engines echoed across the bridge. Headlights flared. A black SUV skidded to a stop. Doors flew open, men with guns stepping out. "Run!" Henry shouted. He pulled her toward the railing. Bullets sliced through the air, hitting the metal beams in showers of sparks. Emily gasped, her heartbeat pounding rain, mixing with the salt of fear and sweat. "Henry, we can't trust me." He dragged her into a narrow passage beneath the bridge. Gunfire chased them as they reached a damp concrete alcove. Henry pressed her against the wall, gripping her wrist tightly. "Listen to me," he said quickly, breathing hard. "In my jacket pocket there's a USB. Take it to Arthur. Don't open it. It's everything: the crimes, the secrets, and the way to save Sarah." "What about you?" He didn't answer, just looked at her for a long, aching moment. The flicker of headlights danced across his face, tired, bruised, but still impossibly proud and beautiful. "Henry, don't leave me." He smiled faintly. "I told you, Emily. I don't leave people. I just stay where they can't follow." A bullet tore past, grazing his shoulder. Blood burst out, mingling with the rain. He stumbled but pushed her away, voice rough with pain. "Go." But she didn't. She knelt beside him, arms around his trembling body despite the gunfire. "No, listen to me. You saved me once. Now it's my turn to save you." Henry laughed weakly, the sound jagged between gasps. "Stubborn. Just like Sarah." The distant wail of sirens forced their pursuers to retreat. Emily helped Henry to a deserted riverside house, half collapsed and leaking. She tore part of her coat to bandage his wound, her hands shaking. The pale light of the flashlight fell across his face, pale, weary, but still warm. "You know," he whispered before I met you, "I thought I was born just to destroy things. But you made me see, maybe I could still deserve forgiveness." "You don't need my forgiveness," she murmured, tears spilling. "You just need to believe you can start again." He smiled faintly. "Start again? With who?" She met his gaze and said nothing. Outside, the rain whispered against the roof. Inside, their breaths merged into one quiet rhythm. Emily touched his cheek with trembling fingers. "With me." He didn't speak. Then slowly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along, he turned his head and pressed his lips against her hand. A soft, lingering kiss, tender, wordless, filled with everything he'd never been able to say. Outside, dawn began to break. The rain hadn't stopped. Henry drifted into sleep, his breathing shallow in her arms. Emily looked toward the window, where the first light of morning spilled in pale and fragile, like a promise left unfinished. She didn't know how much time they had left. Only that in a world of blood and deception, love, even if just a fleeting breath, was still enough to warm a forgotten soul. That morning, the city looked as if it had just awakened from a long nightmare. The rain had stopped, the mist hadn't yet lifted, and the New York sky wore a pale gray hue, a fragile light caught between night and day. In the abandoned house by the river, Emily sat beside Henry. He was still lying there, pale but breathing evenly. The bandage on his shoulder was stained red, but at least he was alive. She hadn't slept all night. She'd only watched him, the man who once embodied sin, power, and secrets, now lying still as a child. Something in his face had changed. Softer. Quieter. She brushed her fingers gently over his wound and whispered, "You once said you could never leave the darkness. But can't you see? Even the darkness is beginning to soften." Henry didn't reply, but his fingers closed faintly around hers, a reflex, a silent answer. By afternoon, the sound of a car echoed outside. Emily stiffened, glancing through the cracked window. A tall figure approached in a dark trench coat. Arthur. She ran to meet him. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw her. "He's alive, still breathing, but I don't know for how long." Arthur stepped inside and pulled a thick envelope from his coat. "I brought news for you and for Henry." He set the folder on the table. "The USB he gave you, I decrypted it. It's not just data about Belmare Logistics. It contains CIA files, records proving Henry was framed by his own people." Emily froze. He was telling the truth. Arthur nodded. He once worked with them to dismantle Belmare, but when he found out they were using children as shields in their trafficking routes, he refused to continue. So they turned him into a traitor. And my sister Arthur lit a cigarette. The smoke curled slowly through the air. Sarah found out the same truth. She tried to expose it. Henry stopped her, not out of fear, but because if that information got out too soon, hundreds of others would have been killed. She didn't believe him, ran, and was captured. Emily lowered her head. A single tear fell onto the wooden table. Both of them, her sister and Henry, bore the same wound. They chose to do what was right, and the price was everything. Henry woke as the evening light poured honey gold into the room. He saw Emily sitting nearby, her eyes swollen from tears, and Arthur standing silently in the corner. "Had enough sleep?" she asked softly, forcing a small smile. Henry smiled faintly back. "If I'd known you were keeping watch all night, I'd have woken sooner." Arthur stepped forward, dropping the file onto the bed. "I've seen it all. You can clear your name, Henry." Henry looked at the folder, then at Emily. "I don't care about clearing anything. The world doesn't care about truth. I just want Sarah free." Arthur frowned. "You talk like you're about to do something stupid." Henry didn't answer. He pushed himself upright, every movement reopening the wound. But in his eyes burned that same old fire, the kind of fire that belonged to a man ready to end every lie, even if it cost him his life. He turned to Emily, voice low and steady. "You can hate me if you want, but I need you to believe in me one more time." She didn't hesitate. "I already did, Henry. The moment you came back for me, don't ask me for anything less." That night they left the house. Arthur drove. Henry sat in the back. Emily by his side. They headed toward the Brooklyn Bridge where Belmare had demanded the exchange. No one spoke. Only the hum of the engine and the night wind filled the silence. When they stopped at the bridge, Henry squeezed her hand. "If I don't come back..." "Don't say that. Listen to me. If I don't take this data to the press, Arthur will help you. Don't let Sarah's sacrifice be wasted." Emily's voice shook. "You'll come back. Because I need you to hear something." Henry raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That I love you. From the moment you said you wouldn't let me disappear in your world." For a long second, he didn't move. Then he looked at her, really looked as if memorizing every detail of her face. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. A kiss that wasn't hurried nor demanding only a quiet goodbye. The wind roared on the bridge. Under the dim amber lights, a line of men in black waited. In the center stood Sarah, her hands bound, but her posture unbroken, her gaze fearless. Henry stepped out alone. He dropped his gun onto the wet concrete. "You want something. What is it?" The man in front stepped forward. "We want the chip. And your silence." Henry gave a faint smile. "I don't have it anymore." A gunshot split the air. Sarah screamed. Henry staggered, a bullet grazing his shoulder, but instead of falling, he pulled a hidden pistol from his sleeve and fired 3 precise shots. It was over in seconds. When the noise faded, only the wind and ragged breathing remained. Sarah ran to him, clutching his arm. "You're insane. You can't throw everything away for me." Henry's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not just for you. For your sister, too." From afar, Emily came running. She froze when she saw them. Henry standing, blood soaking his shirt, eyes shining like dawn itself. "I promised I wouldn't leave anyone behind," he said, voice trembling. "And this time, I kept my word." The police arrived late as always. By the time the red and blue lights bathed the bridge, Henry was still, his head resting on Emily's shoulder. His lips moved faintly, whispering something too soft to catch, like the last breath of the wind. Sarah held Emily's shaking hands. "You have to believe. He did the right thing." Emily nodded, tears falling silently. She looked down at him, the man who had chosen light in a world made of darkness, and realized that sometimes love doesn't save people from tragedy. It simply makes the tragedy worth living. 3 days later, the headlines read, "Leaked documents expose international human trafficking network." No one knew who had sent them. Only Arthur and Emily, the last 2 witnesses, understood justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it only needs one person brave enough to do what's right, and then disappear. That evening, Emily returned to the Hudson River. The water was calm, golden under the setting sun. She opened her palm. Inside lay the gold ring with the red stone now scratched and faded. "You were right, Henry," she whispered. "Darkness can swallow everything, except the light born from love." She dropped the ring into the river. It glimmered once before sinking, a farewell, a period at the end of their shared tragedy. Somewhere she believed Henry was smiling, no longer burdened by guilt, no longer hunted. Only the wind, the light, and the peace he'd been chasing all his life. Spring returned to New York. On the rain-slicked boulevards, steam rose like mist, soft and tender, as it wrapped around the budding trees. The city seemed to breathe again after long, weary months. Everyone was learning how to begin anew, including Emily Carter. She stood on the balcony of a small apartment in Brooklyn, gazing toward the distant Hudson River, the place where everything had once ended. In her hands was a steaming cup of coffee, and around her neck hung a small silver pendant, engraved with 2 intertwined letters, Jess. No one knew she still kept it. No one knew that though the world had moved on, a part of Henry remained in her memories, in her heartbeat, and in the morning light slowly chasing the mist off the water. 3 months had passed since the ring was recovered from the riverbed, and the Belmare case had closed with dozens arrested. The press called it the silent cleansing of New York's underworld. But Emily knew justice was never clean. It always carried the scent of blood loss and the quiet bravery of those who stayed silent so the truth could be heard. Sarah had recovered. She now lived in the suburbs of Boston, running a small foundation to help women and children who had suffered abuse. During her talks, she always spoke of a man who was never meant to appear in history books, but deserved to be remembered in the heart. Emily never asked if her sister had forgiven Henry. Because she could see it, forgiveness didn't always need words. Only enough time for pain to soften. One afternoon, Arthur came to see Emily. He still smoked the same brand of cigarettes. The smoke curled through the sunlight, tracing lines across his weathered face. "You know," he said in his gravelly voice, "I thought Henry was gone for good. But a few days ago, someone sent me a package. No name, no address. What was inside?" He pulled a worn envelope from his coat and placed it on the table. Inside was a photograph, a scene of the Mediterranean coast. Blue sea, white houses, and a lone man standing with his back to the sun, holding a small notebook. In the corner, a line of handwriting read, "Light doesn't die, Emily. It only travels far enough to be seen more clearly." Her heart stopped. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edge of the photo, the handwriting carved into the paper like a touch she could still feel. "Do you think he's alive?" Arthur exhaled a faint smile, tugging at his lips. "I used to think I knew Henry inside out. But maybe a man like him only truly dies when he stops loving." That night, Emily returned to her riverside apartment. The breeze carried the faint taste of salt and rain, stirring memories of stormy nights she thought she'd never survive. She opened her laptop. In her inbox was an email with no sender, only a single audio file attached. When she played it, Henry's voice filled the room, deep, rough, and warm as a whisper against her ear. "If you're hearing this, it means I kept my promise. I've left the darkness behind. I don't know how far I'll go, but I know someone strong enough has stayed to carry on the rest of the light. Don't cry for me. Live for both of us. Because if there's one thing I've ever believed in, it's you." The recording faded, leaving only the sound of distant waves, and in that moment, Emily understood sometimes love doesn't end when someone stays. It ends when one of them is brave enough to leave, so the other can truly live. A year later, the Carter Sullivan Foundation was established, dedicated to supporting victims of violence and trafficking. Emily stood on stage at the opening ceremony, hundreds of flashes sparkling around her. Her voice was calm but steady. "We can't change the past, but we can decide whether our losses mean nothing or everything." She paused, took a breath. "I once knew someone who believed darkness was destiny. But in the end, he taught me that light only matters when it's born from within it." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then came a wave of applause. In the front row, Sarah smiled through tears. And at the back of the hall, Arthur whispered under his breath, "Henry, you see, she did it." That night, Emily returned to her old apartment in Brooklyn. She opened the window, letting the breeze scatter the white curtains. Below, the city shimmered headlights, neon signs, and faint music from somewhere afar, like a love song that kept playing even after the dancers were gone. She sat down at her desk and wrote in her notebook, "No love ever truly ends. It only changes shape from a promise to a memory, to the light that guides those who come after." The candle beside her flickered. She looked at it and smiled. Somewhere across the sea, maybe Henry was looking at the same sky. Between them, there was no longer distance, only peace. The kind of peace they had both spent half their lives searching for. The next morning, the sun rose gold over the Hudson. Emily stepped out onto her balcony, the breeze tangling her hair, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. She closed her eyes, listening to the city waking up. And in her heart, she heard his voice not as a memory, but as something alive and present. "I'm still here, Emily, everywhere the light is." She opened her eyes and smiled. And for that brief moment, the world seemed to stop, leaving only her, the sky, and the quiet certainty that love, if it's real, never truly fades. Love doesn't always end with happiness, but it always leaves a mark, a change, a belief, or a reason to live better. If this story touched you, remember, even after loss, light always finds its way home. Share this story so someone still lost in the dark will know they too deserve to be seen and to be loved.